Everyone is struggling with the question, what is the focus of cybersecurity? What should CISOs be spending their time, energy, and effort on? Why is it that CISOs are still struggling? Why is it that executives are still having such a big difficulty understanding cybersecurity? Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. You know what time it is. It's time of Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. And I know you're looking at the title and going, really? He's talking about risk again? And yes, and the reason is these episodes are based on several things. One, they're based on me researching and seeing sort of what the hot areas are. It's also based on me just sort of, I always spend some time in thought, and don't weird you out on this, but before every episode, I always do a little meditation and like to connect with the audience and sort of see what are those topics that they're struggling with. And then the third one is just what am I seeing coming up with my coaching clients, my coaching calls, my customers, when I'm meeting with executives. And it just seems these last couple of weeks, everyone is struggling with the question, what is the focus of cybersecurity? What should CISOs be spending their time, energy, and effort on? Why is it that CISOs are still struggling? Why is it that executives are still having such a big difficulty understanding cybersecurity? And especially as we finish up the year and many companies are looking at budgets and finalizing their 2024 budgets, we're starting to see this weird trend where lots of companies are once again, because this was an interesting year. On the one hand, from my standpoint, it was one of the worst years when it comes to cyber attacks. It was one of the worst years when it looks at cybercrime. It was one of the worst years when you look at attacks, ransomware, extortion. More people lost more money than any other year. I believe the final numbers are going to be more than double that in 2023. The amount of attacks were on the increase, but here's the problem. Most of them were not publicized, and most of them were not visible. So from a lot of executives that don't really understand, and one of the biggest areas that cybersecurity and CISOs do a terrible job, they're terrible marketers. They're terrible promoters. They're terrible at showing how bad the problem is and how good they are. Most CISOs are all about, oh, no news, good news. We're just going to do our job. We're going to protect the organization. And if there's no news, we're doing great. The problem is most executives walk away. No news means cyber wasn't a big issue. It wasn't a big concern. So one of the big things, if you're a senior level cybersecurity professional or you're a CISO or want to be a CISO, moving into 2024, you better do a better job at marketing and promoting the number of attacks. How good a job you're doing. How many attacks are there on a weekly and monthly basis? How many attempted attacks are occurring every single week? How many attacks are you blocking? How many attacks are you stopping? How many incidents are you responding to on a regular basis? What are the number of calls that your security operations center gets on a regular basis? What are the number of tier 2 and tier 3 incidents that get escalated to that level? Because we know that they're not zero. I don't know any organization where there's 0 attacks, 0 incidents, 0 attempted attacks, 0 blocked attacks, 0, 0, 0. Those numbers typically are in the thousands or tens of thousands, depending on whether we're talking about daily, weekly, or monthly. But here's the problem. Executives don't know that. The only source executives have are the news, and I can't understand it. I have connections with a lot of the top news outlets. I talk to them. I try to bring it up. And for some reason, they just don't like talking about cyber. I don't know if it's that there's too much other fun things in politics. It's better to talk about the politicians and all that other stuff. But they just don't want to talk about cyber. It's just not a hot area to them, which is insane when you look at Americans losing billions of dollars in cybercrime. And it is one of the biggest targeted areas out there today, yet nobody wants to talk about it, right? Shh, shh, let's keep it secret. Let's keep it secret. But here's the issue. If that's what the executives are relying on, the news outlets, and the news outlets aren't talking about it, you're going to be in a situation that many CISOs are this year, and we want to avoid it next year, which is they're starting to notice their budget's getting slashed. They're getting less money. They're getting less resources. And the CISO's like, what is going on? I've had so many CISOs these last couple months as they're finalizing budgets going, Eric, what is happening? We need more resources. We need more people. We need more money. The amount of attacks are out of control. We cannot keep up. Yet, we just got proposed budget numbers, and they're doing at least a 20% cut in our budget this year. How in the world could they do that? Do they have any idea what's happening and what's going on and how hard we're working? And the unfortunate answer is they don't. They don't, because you don't tell them. How are they supposed to know? I had this with a CISO where I'm a little careful because I'll give you what you want, but I'm always going to tell you what you need. And sometimes it's the pulling the Band-Aid off where it hurts a little bit. You don't like it, but it needed to be done. And he was so frustrated because his budget was being cut by like 30%. I'm like, but of course they would. And I'm like, you never told them how bad the problem is. You've never given them stats. You've never given them updates. You've never given them details. Whenever they ask you about cybersecurity, you always say things are great and things are fine. There has been no attacks, no issues, no problems. You've given them no data. So why would they spend money on something? Why would they spend money on something when there's no perceived value? So let me let you in on a hint. If your budget in any area, whether it's cyber, marketing, or anything, if your budget is being cut, it's being cut for one reason and one reason alone. The executives don't see value. It's that simple, my friends. So make it a wake-up call. It might not be the best 2024 if your budget is being cut by 10, 15, 20%, but let it be a wake-up call that you have not done a good job of showing executives the value. Because if they truly understood the value, if they truly understood how massive the attacks are against the organization, how many attacks are actually getting in, but you're stopping them before they get to critical data, or how many close calls there were where there could have been 5, 10, or 15 million. I have one client. They had 3 close calls this year. From a phishing attack with finance, it was actually going to transfer $2.5 million. It would have been, another one was an extortion attack. It would have been about 7 mil. And I mean, these are like final minute. Somebody from security stepped in and fixed it. If they weren't there at that exact moment, it would have cost the company, these 3 close calls, $17 million. They never told the executive team. Nobody was ever made aware because, and this is where people that are CISOs that are still struggling with being a security engineer, they think, oh, if I tell them, it'll show that we made a mistake because we should have protected it sooner. We should have caught it quicker. I'm like, you're missing the whole point. Maybe that's how security engineers think, but chief officers think, you know something, we won. It doesn't matter whether it was a close call. It doesn't matter if it came down to the last seconds of play. We won, and they need to be aware of it. Because I'll tell you right now, if those executives knew that there were 3 close calls, that if your team was cut even by one person, one, two, or maybe all three of those would have happened, and it would have cost the company $17 million minimum. That's not even reputational damage, fines, impact to customers, anything else. Minimum $17 million. Trust me, they wouldn't have cut your budget. But they didn't know. We didn't communicate to them what was happening and what was occurring. So we need to do a better job of explaining the risk. We need to do a better job on a weekly basis of sending them basic stats. Not talking 30-page emails, simple number each week. Just wanted to keep to the executive team. Just want to make sure everyone's aware this week we had 17,000 attempted attacks against the organization that we prevented. We had 3 tier 5 incidents, and we had 1 close call. This is a 15% increase from the week before, or this is a 10% decrease from the previous week. Please let me know if you have any questions. Boom. Short and sweet. All right, 3 lines, 3 numbers, boom. Nice, simple, easy. And just send that every week. And then what you're going to find, if you're doing it correctly, is they're going to want you to present quarterly. Then they're going to want monthly. And then most likely it's going to be twice a month is going to be the rhythm, because what's happening is they're starting to realize that, wait a second, cybersecurity still is the #1 problem to our organization. It's still an area we're struggling with. It's still an area we don't have our arms around, and it's still an area we need to put more energy and effort against. But your job as a chief officer, as a chief information security officer, is to be a world-class marketer. So we need to do a better job of marketing and presenting the facts to the executives. Now, with that backdrop, but Eric, what do we do if we have limited resources, if our budgets are being cut or our budgets are staying the same, and we can't do everything? Once again, communication, communication, communication. I have a principle, and to me it's more a rule, to me it's more a law, because it's always true. In any area, whether it's relationships, whether it's work, whether it's personal, whether it's friends, all problems are created by poor communication, and all problems are fixed by proper communication. Communication, communication, communication is key. If you want to have world-class relationships, if you want to be a world-class CISO, you have to be a world-class communicator. You have to be able to communicate what's happening and what's occurring. So it's easy. I was just on a coaching call where I'm working with these CISOs, and they're like, but Eric, they keep putting more on our plate, and we can't do it all, but they keep putting more on our plate. And I asked them a simple question. I'm like, do they ask you when they put more on your plate? And they go, well, yeah. And I'm like, and what do you tell them? And they're like, okay. Hello, what are we doing? If we are overloaded, why do we say okay? Why are we pushing back? Why are we going, no, time out? Listen, here's the current staff we have. Here are the current resources. Right now, the current team that we have can handle these 8 risks. These 8 risks. You want us to do something else, so tell me, which of these 8 should we not do? And they're like, no, we want you to do all 8. Well, if you want us to do all 8, great, but if you want us to now do 9, you either have to give us more resources or you have to remove one from the plate, or one of these is not going to get done. So instead of us deciding, we want you to pick. We're telling you right now that we are fully saturated. We are telling you right now that we can only do these 8 areas. So if you're telling us we have to do 9 and 10, then I want you to tell me which of the current 8 should we not be doing, or should we scale back on? Because you can only put a gallon of water into a gallon bucket. You can't put 2 gallons of water into a 1 gallon bucket, and right now the bucket is full. So I'm giving you the data, I'm telling you what we're doing, I'm telling you the risks, I'm telling you what we're working on, and if you want us to do additional things, then you either need to give us more resources or you need to remove current items from our plate. And it's one of those things, it is one of the simplest, it is one of the easiest, it is one of the most powerful things to do. Yet for some reason, chief information security officers don't like to do it. They're like afraid, or, oh, I can't push back. Or but the reality is, isn't it better to have open, honest communication on what's happening than to just keep saying yes, and in reality, you're struggling, your team's struggling, everyone's frustrating, and things aren't getting done and things are falling off the plate? That's not a good way to operate. Right? That's not a healthy way to operate. So you need to do a better job at communicating. You need to put together, as we finish up this year, here's what we're currently doing, and here's what our current team is capable of doing. Here are items, risks that we think are still high that we are not able to do because our team can't handle it. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. This is the current size of our team, and these are the current areas we're focused on. These are areas that we can't focus on because our team is not big enough, or you just cut the budget. Now, this isn't a punishment. You're cutting my budget, so we're doing less, right? This isn't a work slowdown, which says you cut our budget, we're doing less. It's a reality check. It's going, listen, you're cutting our budget by 20%. Cool. You can do that. But our team is fully saturated. It's not like we had 20% waste. So I just want you to be aware that here's what our team is currently doing. If you are cutting our budget or our team by 20%, what 20% do you no longer want us to do in 2024? Now, I usually go in with a proposed list of cuts. So I'll go in, I'll say, okay, here's what we're currently doing this year with a $5 million budget. We now have a $4 million budget moving next year, which is okay, I understand. I mean, people are concerned about recession and economy and all those things. But just so you know, these 2 items that we're currently doing are no longer going to be able to be done. Is that okay? Or is there something else you don't want us to do? But the reality is, if you're cutting our budget, we're going to be cutting what our team currently does. So we just want to make sure we're on the same page. Which of these current items are you okay not being done? And 1 or 2 things will happen. One, they'll say, okay, we understand, and let's not do this item. We know it's not ideal, but that item seems to be a lower priority. So we agree with your recommendation. That's cool. Or they'll come back and go, oh, we didn't realize you were doing all these things. We didn't realize that by cutting your budget, you were going to cut one of these items. So maybe we'll look at increasing your budget back to where it is. And I've seen that happen. And here's the part. Don't be mad at the executives. Look in the mirror. I was sitting and we had this exact situation just last week where I went in to present to the board because they were cutting the budget by 25%. And the CISO, great at managing, was a great program manager, was not a chief officer, was not a communicator, was basically a really good lieutenant. They were really good second in command, right? But they weren't good at making decisions. And they basically, whatever the board did, they just accepted and kept saying, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. And I'm sitting there going, this isn't working. And the executives knew it, so they brought me in. So I just said, listen, here's the reality. The team hasn't been doing a great job communicating. So you had no idea what the team was doing, and you had no idea what your money was being spent. So logically, you cut the budget by 25%. I said, that's reasonable based on the lack of information that was provided to you. But let me just show you what's going on here. Here's the current threat landscape. Here's the numbers, the number of attacks, the number of incidents, the number of close calls for your organization for the last 11 months. here's what the team was currently doing, and here's what a 25% cut looks like on cybersecurity to your organization. This, and this are no longer going to be done. Now, these are estimates, but my guess is if these three things aren't done, then just looking at this year, if those three items weren't done, then 7% more attacks would have occurred. And just this year, that would have cost you $30 million. So once again, I just want you to have the raw data available that moving into next year, these items are going to be cut. And if it's anything like this year, that's probably going to lead to an increase in attacks, increase in compromise, which would estimate around $30 million. Is that what you really want to do? And then after they realized and had the numbers, they then put it back to where it was. We actually got a slight increase because there were a couple additional projects they wanted us to work on. And I'm all happy. And the person with the CISO title that, like I said, shouldn't be a CISO. They should have been a deputy, right? CISO or a program manager. They were all mad. So you mean if you didn't come in, they would have made this stupid mistake? And how stupid? I'm like, wait a second. All I did was present data to them that they didn't have. Now, let me ask you a question. Prior to that meeting, did any of the executives have that data? Nope. Did you have that data? Mm-hmm. So how come you didn't present it to them? Why are you mad at them? How can they make a decision on data that was never given? Yet you should be frustrated, right? This is where the pulling the Band-Aids. I sometimes say things that people don't like to hear, but they need to hear. I said, I pulled the Band-Aid off, and the reality is you could have avoided this. If you would have presented the data to them and did it throughout the year, this would have never happened. Most likely, you probably would have got an increase in budget, and this could have been avoided. But you have to be willing to communicate with the execs. You have to be willing to show them what the current risk is to the organization and what the current risk or exposure is. Because the reality is, if you've never had the conversation of this is our budget, this is what we're doing for that budget, and this is what we can't do because we have a limited budget, and if you increase our budget, this is what it looks like. And if you decrease our budget, this is what it looks like, and run potential simulations. So if we increase our budget, most likely this would be the reduction in cyber attacks or the cost to the business. And if you cut our budget, this would also be the negative impact or monetary impact to the organization or business. Remember, world-class CISOs talk dollars and cents. That's the language of business. That's the language you talk. You don't go in and talk about threats and vulnerabilities and all that stuff because that doesn't mean a whole lot other than showing the high-level data. But ultimately, that has to be translated into dollars and cents. What is the monetary impact to our organization by cutting our budget by 20%? What is the monetary impact or benefit to the organization by increasing our budget by 20%? And we have to have those numbers, and that's what needs to be presented to the board. If we're not openly communicating with them on what are the risks, what are we currently reducing and minimizing, and what are the risks that we're not able to deal with, then how in the world are the executives going to make proper decisions? The big push in 2024, if you're a CISO, is embrace the C&O. Embrace the outer letters, not the inner letters. To me, if I look at most, not all, so if you're the unique exception, don't get mad at me, but most CISOs that I work with and that I see are really good at information security. They're really good at cybersecurity. They're really good at understanding, managing risk, and building out a very robust architecture. They're not really good at being a chief officer. They're not really good at communication, business, dollars, financial impact, communication, showing cost-benefit analysis, showing them here's what you're getting for the amount you're spending. And here's what it looks like if you increase, and here's what it looks like if you decrease. That is the fundamental reason why your budgets are being cut, because you haven't embraced the chief officer. And it's all about embracing risk. What are the risks to the organization? Just as we finish this up, I just want to reemphasize some of the key messages, because I'll tell you, some of the core key messages in cybersecurity, your executive team still doesn't know. And most likely, if they don't know it, once again, love of my heart, I'm not trying to pick on you during this podcast, but it's because you haven't communicated it. First, most important message, your executive team must understand moving into 2024, because it's becoming more and more a reality. 100% security doesn't exist. Well, in any reasonable fashion. 100% security means zero functionality. So if you have an organization with any functionality, any technology at all, you are not 100% secure, which means attacks are going to happen. So remember the law. Law of cybersecurity, every executive on your team should know it, understand it, and have it memorized. When you add functionality, you decrease security. When you add functionality, you increase risk. So in their minds, organizations where there's a very, very effective CISO, even if the CISO is not in the room, when they're making a business decision, here's what happens. What is the value and benefit from doing this? What is the risk and exposure? Is the value and benefit worth the risk? That's how world-class organizations operate when they have a world-class CISO at the helm, because they've trained every executive. They've trained every president, vice president, director, and manager. That security isn't their job, it's integrated into everyone's job. And everybody knows it's quite simple. When we're making decisions, we must always say, what is the value and benefit? We must always say, what is the risk and exposure? And then it's real simple. Is the benefit worth the risk? It's really that simple a calculation. And then everything you present to them is around that. When you're going in and you're presenting the budget, you're presenting what's happening, you're presenting what you're currently getting, it's all about four things. What is the risk? Likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, and cost to fix it. All right, so essentially, when you're going in and presenting, here's what we're currently getting for the $5 million budget. You're listing the risk. You're saying this is the likelihood of occurring, this is the cost if it occurs, and this is how much we're spending. And then that should add up to your budget. And you should say, this is what we're currently spending our budget on. Then, if they go in and decide to cut your budget, you basically say, okay, which of these items do you want to cut? Which of these items do you want to reduce? Which of these items do you no longer want us to do? Now, it's a completely different conversation. Instead of it just being abstract numbers, which unfortunately, for most executives it was, because they didn't understand what you're doing, now you're making it crystal clear what you're doing, because you're really getting rock solid about risk, understanding what you are and are not doing, and openly communicating to the execs. So whether your budget has been increased or decreased, let's make this a lesson learned as we finish up this year, and let's start really embracing and focusing in on being a chief officer. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Life of a CISO. I look forward to seeing you next week.